Welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm your host, André Hedlund, educational psychologist, author, geek, and nerd. This show brings you science and learning through conversations with stellar people from different fields. Put on your spacesuits and hold tight. Our voyage into the learner's universe begins now. Welcome to another episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm honored to have one of my best teachers, I might say, Paul Howard-Jones. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. How's everything?
Everything is good, and it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you, Andre.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. And I was actually thinking about Bristol a lot a couple of days ago because it's been 5 years since my last visit. So are you still based in Bristol?
Yeah, very much based in Bristol. I'm actually just looking out of the window onto Berkeley Square at the moment, and I
Oh,
know
yeah.
you know Berkeley
I know.
Square.
I know it very well. Yes. I miss it. And let me ask you something, Paul. One of the purposes of this podcast is really to talk about science and learning. And I think in light
Mm.
of recent news and people are, especially today, they're believing more fake news. They don't believe science. They don't trust science. So I want to ask you a very important question. Why is science important? What can you tell us about why we should believe science, why we should trust science?
One of the most important things about science, which is also a little bit of a weakness for it in terms of gaining traction in the press sometimes, but it is its
Yeah.
skepticism. It's skeptical. So scientists are very unwilling to say, I am absolutely 100% sure about this. They will probably give you some sort of statistical threshold of certainty about something, but they're always trying to keep their minds open. They're always trying to be critical of their own research. And I think that skepticism, which is built into scientific thinking, is a really good reason for people to listen to science and trust scientists. But as I say, I think one of the downsides of that, of course, is that when scientists do talk on media shows and to the public, and they write in newspapers or they're reported in newspapers, they're always saying things like quite likely, probably,
Yeah.
strong evidence to suggest, as
Exactly.
if they're not certain. and,
Yeah.
and and in this day and age, sounding absolutely 100% certain seems to be what really projects the voices of our politicians. This is what politicians want to sound like. They want to sound 100% certain all the time, and so in a way it sometimes counts against the credibility almost of scientists in the public eye, that we don't speak like that. We talk about things in a much more measured, balanced way. But that is also the reason why people should listen to scientists
Exactly.
and to science.
I like this cautious way that, when we think about science, if there's new evidence, if there's better evidence, then science changes its mind. Scientists change their mind and they do new experiments and things like that. But at the same time, as you said, I think people prefer certainty over doubt, and that's
Yeah.
very scary nowadays. I'm sure
Mm.
you can see some of the consequences up close there at the University of Bristol. I feel that a lot of people have been somehow infected, let's say, with this, extremist view that, it's either this or that, and there's no room for discussion. And that's quite scary to me anyway. As a teacher, as you are also a teacher, it might be hard for us to convince students otherwise because they're set, they believe that this is the truth and there's nothing that can change my mind. I think that's quite concerning. Yes.
It,
But
it is concerning.
yeah, I wanted to ask you now, why did you get into neuroscience? What was the reason that led you to this area in particular? Was there anyone who inspired you, or are you a nerd like me? What was it?
Well, so it's, how I got into science generally is a longer story, but
Yeah.
I yeah, basically I was a school teacher, and I was teaching design and technology, which I think goes by different names. In America, I think they call it workshop or something. So I was a shop teacher. But it's really about encouraging children to design and make things. And I was teaching that in a school, and I just felt that I wanted to know more about how children learnt in order to inform my teaching. And I suppose I was quite surprised back then, and we're talking sort of in the 90s, that there wasn't a very strong contact at all, really, between psychology and neuroscience and education. And I used to bunk off in the lunch times as a teacher, and they didn't like you doing that because they always worried that there was going to be a fire drill or something, or there'd be a fire. So there was this general rule that you had to stay on site, but I would sort of
Yeah.
break that rule sometimes to go to the university next door and go to the psychology and the neuroscience books to understand more about how we learned. And I was reading books on connectionism, and
Yeah.
weirdly on artificial intelligence, actually, because they were just it was the beginning of artificial neural networks, and I was really interested in that. um, so yeah, that's how it started for me, and that sort of grew, if you like, so that I
Yeah.
started doing a degree in psychology when I started training teachers. And then while I was training teachers, I bumped into Guy Claxton, who is he's a sort of well-known sort of professor of education. And he said to me, um, we're looking for people to start imaging in this area. And I already had a PhD in medical physics. And I said, well, actually, potentially that's something I could do. I could possibly use that PhD and what I've learned from that PhD in medical physics to start applying brain imaging in my educational research that I was doing as a teacher trainer. But I don't think when I said that, and I remember standing there looking all enthusiastic. I don't think I knew exactly how difficult that was going to be
Yes.
because neuroimaging is not very straightforward, and particularly the methods of analysis, and how you
Yeah.
analyze brain data. But yeah, that's really, and before. Even while I was training teachers, I actually started my first brain imaging study. So it was
Oh.
very odd in a way. I would be going out into schools and observing my trainees teaching
Yeah.
their first lessons, and then go back and I would be asking them to volunteer to go inside a brain scanner so I could find out what was going on.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I think it must have been exciting as well to work with brain images because, this is something that I think you were the one who said the neuroscience is sexy to me a couple of years ago,
Oh,
and then
okay, yeah.
and I think
Well, there's
people
an
are
allure.
fascinated. Yes.
Yeah, there is an
Yeah.
allure to the brain. And,
Yeah.
again, it's one of those double-sided things. There's two sides to that. I mean, on the one hand, it can lead people into misunderstandings because people
Yes.
get so excited about it. But on the other hand, it's actually really helpful way of engaging people in reflecting on thinking processes and on how we
Yes.
learn. So it's a two-sided coin, really.
Definitely. And what exactly are you working on right now, Paul, in terms of research or what are you excited about it? Because
Um,
neuroscience is making progress, science is making progress. What's next? What's coming?
well, yeah, I've got to go down to London next week and talk about this. So I've been giving it a lot of thought. And I suppose what's happened to me in a way, well, two things have happened. I think, firstly, um, I've got quite heavily into sort of climate change education, and
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
very concerned with sustainability and climate change. The other thing is that I have um, really had, I think it was probably during COVID, I really started reflecting. I think a lot of people started reflecting during COVID,
Yes,
didn't they?
definitely.
We had a bit of time on our hands.
Yes.
And I was thinking, actually, where is the evidence that teachers are using this in the classroom? Where's the evidence in terms of children's learning? And I think this field of neuroscience and education has been going on long enough for us to be able to expect to see that. And so, I was quite pleased in a way when I started working for the for SEML, which is the Centre for Early Maths Learning in Loughborough. Um, as part of their team, they wanted me to look more at why and how teachers apply research findings in the classroom. And so it gave me an opportunity to look at the literature and the research on that. And I began to realize that actually that pathway from a teacher hearing something about a new research finding and actually applying it in their classroom, it's quite a complex and challenging
Yeah.
path for them to tread. And that's why it doesn't happen very often. I think it doesn't happen as often as it should,
Yes.
you know. So I've become much more interested in how teachers think and in how this field of neuroscience and education can move forward in terms of communicating findings to teachers and communicating with education. And I've spent more time in teacher education in my department here, talking to trainee teachers and working to implement neuroscience into our teacher training here,
Yeah.
and also running experiments that are not about learning but about teaching,
Okay.
um, and really sort of approaching this idea that we might be able to develop a science of teaching, which I think it's a very controversial idea. I almost hesitate to
Yeah.
mention it on your podcast because a lot of people will think, hang on, we're going to have scientists in white coats telling teachers how they should teach. No,
Yeah.
not like that. But I do think there are types of laboratory experiment that you could run to investigate some of the very fundamental assumptions we make about teaching that haven't yet been tested, such
Yeah.
as how you teach affecting learning. This relationship between teaching and learning. It's very under investigated, and one of the reasons for that is because teaching is so complex. But I do think that there is the opportunity to run experimental tasks, and to look at that and to be able to analyze what somebody is doing when they're teaching and what somebody is doing when they're learning, and understand the relationship between those two. So that's the sort of area I've been going into. I suppose because I'm at the latter end of my career, that it's come to a point where I'm more indulgent, and I'm sort of
Yeah.
I'm just checking out things that interest me as possibilities,
Yeah. Yeah. That
and
makes
and,
sense.
and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm being a bit more experimental. And I thought, well,
Yeah.
nobody's ever going to give me money to do this, but I'm still going to do it anyway. I mean, I did put in for a grant, but unsurprisingly, the
Yeah.
reviewers said, this is
Yeah.
outrageous. Not only are we not going to give you any money, nobody should be given money for a science of teaching. This is awful
Yeah.
idea. But I just think you need to be trying these things,
Yes,
to understand
definitely.
them.
Yeah. And interesting you should mention that because I'm not sure you're aware that just a couple of days ago in Edinburgh, there was a huge English conference, IATEFL, International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. And one of the plenaries was about the science of learning, which was really interesting. I was not there. I watched the recording, but some concerns have been raised by other teachers, EFL, TESOL teachers, exactly as you mentioned. They're worried that science is going to take their place, or science is going to
Mm.
dictate what they have to do in the classroom. And I remember watching an episode of another podcast where a teacher was very vocal about that. He says that we don't want to take, accept this. We don't think we can be replaced. We don't think that we should listen to a structure or a structured way to teach. And that's a question I have for you, Paul, because one of the things that really helped me as a teacher came from your research. Engage, build, and consolidate, which is a framework
Mm.
that has been quite helpful. I've been talking about it to everyone, and I don't think it's a straitjacket. I actually think it helps me. It empowers me to understand how learning happens in the brain. So, what can you say about that? Do you think science of learning is really putting a straitjacket, on teachers, or creating frameworks that are so rigid that they cannot question, or is it the other way around?
Well, you see, this is one of the reasons why I started looking at the science of teaching, because
Yeah.
the experiments that we were able to run, and these are published in Mind, Brain and Education in that journal last year, that what they showed was the complexity and the richness of teaching. Now, we just looked at a 15-minute segment of teaching. We asked two people to teach each other a foreign language, a language that they didn't know, neither the teacher nor the learner knew. And it's very much, it's a kind of an artificial situation, but it allows you to look at various issues. And one of them is basically, well, what is the variation that you see in terms of different styles? And you would think, well, 15 minutes, it's not going to be that much. But no, actually, massive differences and diversity in how teachers approach that. So actually, I think if we do approach it scientifically, if we put teaching under the microscope, if you like, and we start doing these sorts of laboratory experiment, what it's going to do is actually expose this complexity, this richness, not necessarily in a way, or not ever in a way, I don't think, that will translate into there being a prescription from scientists, or probably from anybody else, actually, about what you should do when you go in the classroom, because every classroom, every child is different, and you will always have to adapt any ideas, any strategies to suit those particular contexts. But let's look at this complexity. Let's celebrate this complexity. Let's be aware of this complexity. Let's look at teaching more scientifically, I think, because that will that really, what we will find, I think, will reassure these voices that are concerned about the scientization of education. It should reassure them. And that's certainly what we found in this paper. And I did say, actually in the discussion of the paper, what we've found essentially has demonstrated the impossibility of ever being able to prescribe what a series of actions that are going to lead to effective teaching, because of the need to adapt to context all the time. And having said that, we did apply the engage, build, consolidate framework in a very broad way and in a very simple way, whereby we were just counting instances, and we were able to find that the instances of in each category correlated to the amount of learning that was achieved by the learner in that little experimental task. So in fact, it does support the idea that not only can you look at teaching in the laboratory, if you like, but also this engage, build, consolidate framework has meaning in terms of teaching effectiveness. Definitely. But at the same time, and this is the nice thing about the skepticism of science, because it throws up questions and you think you know something and then it turns out you don't know something. We were looking at engagement simply in terms of counting the number of times that the teacher praised the student, and actually it was negatively correlated with learning, right?
Oh, really?
So the more the teacher was saying that's good, the less the student was learning. And that's because, looking at the video, because we videoed all of these instances, it was quite often a reflection of the anxiety of the teacher, that they were, it was kind of like a self-soothing thing. Keep saying, "Oh, well done, good, that's great." Whatever.
Even when they didn't do a good job, so we tend to
even
say
when
that.
they didn't do a good job. That's exactly. It wasn't targeted praise that was rewarding a particular instance of scaffolding or whatever. It was just a general blurb of praise words, and that's the sort of thing that actually people are picking up in some educational research as well, that a positive classroom is a good thing, but actually you cannot give a list of things to do in the classroom that will lead to effective learning, right? And they've tried it. They've given people checklists, and experts have come together, they've identified things that make up good teaching, gone into a classroom, ticked them off, and then found out actually the scores they're getting do not correlate to what the students are achieving at all. Because you can't boil teaching down to a set of rules. And that's not just what teachers will say and what those voices that are concerned about the scientization of learning. It's also what the science can tell you if we start
Yes,
looking at teaching more scientifically. So
that's so
yeah,
true.
engage,
Yeah,
build, consolidate. It's a framework that's, in the process of always developing. It's really just a three categories, to help
yeah.
you think about where the science connects to the education. But already when you start doing these experiments with it, you start realizing how to interpret it in different ways.
Excellent. And could you very quickly just explain what each category means? Engage, build, consolidate. So why
Sure.
are those important? Yeah.
So engage, build, consolidate. I would hesitate to call it a model of learning. It's not really a model. It's just really three categories of learning processes. So I think the first thing you need to do to really analyze teaching, and analyze learning in the classroom is to think about what are the processes that might be going on here in terms of the mind and the brain. And one way of doing that is to categorize them in terms of engagement, which is really about the emotional responses. It's a matter of whether your attention is being captured in the moment, whether you're noticing and attending to a learning opportunity. And there are lots of things that we know about the brain that can influence that, such as novelty, curiosity, praise in the right way.
Yes.
Um, those sorts of things, sharing attention as well, actually, with somebody else can increase that reward system response in the brain. And reward uncertainty is one of my favorites because that's all about games. Those sorts of things can really improve engagement. It means that you're going to pay more attention to that learning opportunity. And then the next category is build, and that's really about that moment when a new piece of knowledge or understanding is represented in your brain for the first time. And that might come about from combining information from the outside world, or from the inside world, from your memory. And it will probably be stored in your working memory so you can attend to it. But that working memory at the front of the brain, those frontal cortical networks, actually that requires a lot of effort. It's very temporary storage when it's there. So the third category is consolidation, when you have to rehearse that knowledge, preferably in different ways, in different contexts, for it to become interconnected with other information in your cortex. And actually that distribution there's going to be a distribution of that knowledge across the cortex then. So it's no longer just held in the working memory for which is very temporary, it's very limited. It's actually stored across the cortex and connected with all sorts of other ideas and information that you have, building on your prior knowledge.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much. And I wanted to mention your book because I was there when you launched this book, Evolution of the Learning Brain, or how you got
Yeah,
to be so
well
smart.
done.
Yes, so
You got a
yes, I
copy
was
of
there.
it, like
I
the
got a
other.
copy and a signed copy. You wrote Happy
Oh,
Evolution.
wow. Okay, it's worth millions now.
So that's great. Thank you so much. I remember reading this on the way to Victoria Station. I was going to London, and it's a 2.5 hour trip, I think, right? From Bristol
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
London. And then I read the whole book almost. And it's fascinating because I'm such a nerd and I really like history and anthropology and geography. And I think you combined all of those elements so well here, Paul. And you're such a great writer. I must say that. So it's very entertaining. So we want to keep
You're
reading the
very
book.
kind.
But that's true. And I was wondering now, because there have been some new developments, and I'm specifically talking about generative AI and new tech tools. And does that concern you at all? Because, in terms of evolution, what's going to happen to us human beings using those tools? Because let me just give you some more context before you answer. Because one of the things that really worries me as a teacher is that my students are delegating their thinking skills to machines. They're not even thinking about what they're supposed to do. So they just ask ChatGPT or something like that. So that they're not engaging with that cognitively. They just, you know, copy, paste, and they don't care about whatever ChatGPT gives them. This is quite detrimental to learning, because there's no learning happening if they're doing that, if they're
Mm.
delegating those skills to computers. Do you have any thoughts about what might happen to us as a society if we keep doing things like that? based on your book, based on all the research you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I am concerned about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we are struggling, I think, to keep up with it
Yeah.
as academics in terms of our academic systems. And I actually asked a student about it last week. I said, off the record, I'm not asking you to tell on any of your fellow students or anything, but what's going on with this? How are students using it? And she said, well, to be honest with you, I think it's making us lazy. I mean, I've been taught how to use it at school in ways that are seen as appropriate, such as asking AI to identify flaws in my essay or areas for improvement, if you like. And
After
that's
you've
supposed
done
to
the
be
work, right? So you do
after
the
you've done the
work.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But even that, is actually relieving you of the effort of having to read through it and ask yourself that question.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any getting away from the idea that it is relieving us of the burden of using our brains.
Yeah.
And one thing that comes through very strongly from the research, when you look at all the different techniques and strategies that people have developed to support learning, they almost always require effort. I mean, there's no way of learning without effort.
Yes.
It
Yes.
just doesn't happen. I mean, even when I was talking about the holding that new information in your working memory networks, actually that takes effort, which is one of the
Yes.
reasons why you have to consolidate that learning. And you can only consolidate it by rehearsing it. And if you're not rehearsing it, and that's not just about the content of the essay, it's also about the processes in terms of reviewing that content, the study skills, if you like.
Yes.
So yeah, it is concerning. It is concerning, and I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that we need to probably change the model by which we are teaching students. And I think
Yes.
we're going to probably shift more towards the old school oral assessment tutorials and those
Yeah.
sorts of things, because that just makes sense. We want students that can think on their feet independently without having to consult ChatGPT.
That's it. And I was listening to a podcast with Miguel Nicolelis. He's a very famous Brazilian neuroscientist, and I think he's writing a novel about what he thinks will happen to humanity, after the introduction of AI. But he said something. He mentioned the reverse Flynn effect, that apparently our IQ is dropping and people are getting dumb and because they're not making the effort, and we're not building the thing is we're not building prior knowledge. We're not learning things. We Google things all the time. We go to Wikipedia. Now we use ChatGPT, and this is quite concerning. Do you think there's any truth to what he said, that in a couple of years we might see very high levels of, I don't know, maybe people will not be as intelligent as we are nowadays because of those tools? Or is it something that it's too far-fetched that probably won't happen?
It all depends what we're doing instead. I mean,
Yeah.
the student who's not spending time reviewing their essay and just asking ChatGPT what they need to do to improve it. I mean, what are they doing with that spare time that generates? Are they going to be reading a book that's going to be challenging them, or are they just going off down the pub and having a pint of beer? I don't know.
Or worse,
I
they
mean,
might be on TikTok, watching
could they
funny
be on TikTok?
videos.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that's the question. So it's actually trying to imagine what our lifestyle will be like in,
yeah,
in, in 20 years' time when AI has become so integrated into our lives. I mean, generally speaking, life becomes more competitive. I mean, human competition with each other can be a bit of a drag, but it kind of keeps us on our toes mentally. So
yeah.
if it becomes a world where we are all competing with each other to use AI, and so actually our minds are becoming dedicated to applying AI in different ways and maintaining our control over it, if you like,
Yes.
um, then it's quite possible that we have a very plastic cortex, and the cortex is just going to be changing again in our lifetime. We're not talking about an evolutionary effect. It's just going to be normal cortical plasticity causing us to, affecting our brains and causing us to become adapted to a new world, a new environment with new demands. I'm not sure whether we're ever going to find ourselves in a world where there aren't mental demands because we're so competitive with each other. And I think so. I think I think ultimately we're probably going to be all right, but I can see that there is going to be a there's going to be a transition which is going to be quite painful, I think,
Oh, yes.
because AI is questioning so much of what we've done traditionally in education.
Yes. And I want to move towards the end of this episode by focusing on your latest endeavors and talk about your website, your podcast, which I listen to, Mind, Brain, and Planet. So that's very interesting. I love the name, by the way. And I think that there's a connection with AI. Uh, just to give you some context, a couple of weeks ago, there was a trend, I think, all over the world that people started generating images following the style of a very important Japanese artist. And for each image generated by ChatGPT or whatever AI tool they used, there's so much water that needs to be used to just keep the computers, cool
Mm.
enough. And so there's this aspect of using AI which is completely damaging to the planet as well. We know that. And I feel like, so can you tell us a little bit about this new blog that you have, this podcast, and how engaged you are with, the climate cause?
Yeah, so I mean, anybody who's sort of read that book, Evolution of the Learning Brain, they'll know that
Yes.
that it has a lot about Charles Darwin in it at the beginning, and it has a lot about the future of the learning brain in the last chapter. And um, in order to write that book, I was very lucky to be able to travel to Ecuador and to the Galapagos Islands, and this
Oh,
was about
wow.
like 12,
Yeah.
12 years ago. But and I met some amazing evolutionary scientists there for this conference, and we went swimming with sharks and did all sorts of really exciting things. It was really
Yeah.
great.
Wow.
But also, it really came. That was, I think, the beginning of me realizing that my traveling as an academic was having a real impact on the environment, and I started becoming a lot more interested in climate change and sustainability. Really, while I was writing that last chapter of the book, thinking, well, actually, is our brain ready for the future, and particularly this massive issue that's coming down the road called climate change? Um, and I want to. So now I'm sort of turning my thoughts about how we learn towards sustainability because it seems to me that the critical issue that we need to understand is our relationship with the planet, how we are responding to issues, these really critical issues regarding sustainability. And rather than taking a sort of which I think the normal thing that people do in these situations is say, oh, we should do this, we should do that, and isn't it awful? So we must do this immediately or whatever. I'm not taking that approach. I actually want to understand why people are responding the way they are. In some good ways, maybe in some bad ways. Why does, for example, how we buy our food and how we eat, how does that affect our relationship with the planet?
Yeah.
I mean, why would we not want to heat our homes in a sustainable way? Why is in the UK, for example, we're really sort of resisting heat pumps? There's a lot of suspicion and governmental conspiracies being talked about heat
Yes.
pumps,
Yeah.
and also like messaging, what sort of messaging is actually encouraging us to take action and encouraging us to change our attitudes. So all of this is like about the mind and it's about the brain. And I'm really interested in that relationship between the mind, the brain, and the planet. So there's a blog on mindbrainplanet.com,
Yeah.
which is the website. And also, I'm publishing these podcasts where I interview scientists who have researched these issues about how our brains and minds are responding to the planetary crisis. And the blog will give you all the research links. The podcast will provide it in hopefully entertaining fashion, and
Definitely.
it's not judgmental. It's really just about understanding the human condition, and particularly how humans are responding to the changing planet.
Yeah, and can you
So
tell us?
mindbrainplanet.com. If you want to
Perfect.
find it, it's
And
on
I'll link it
Spotify.
here. Yeah,
Yeah, it's on all the major platforms. And if you just
excellent.
search for Mind, Brain, and Planet, you should find it.
Yes, and have you found anything about why we behave so badly towards the planet? Why is it so difficult, Paul, for us to make the right choice concerning the planet? Is it because it's too far removed from our immediate reality, so we cannot
Yeah,
really, yeah,
well, I think psychological distance has got a lot to
yeah,
do with it. So it's about, physical distance,
yeah,
distance in terms of time as well, because we're thinking about how things are going to be in 10, 20 years time. There is one particularly interesting part of the brain which is cropping up a lot, which is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex,
uh-huh,
which is
yeah,
right at the front of the brain between the two hemispheres. And what's interesting is that the amount that activates when you're hearing these messages about the climate and about sustainability, that really does tend to predict better whether you're going to do anything about it than what you
uh-huh,
say. And it turns out this region of the brain is very involved with imagination, and it's about whether you are imagining the future and imagining your role in that future. And I think it's just fascinating because that kind of links up, climate change and the brain and the mind to the importance of imagination. And we need, and I think that's one of the things which is limiting our ability to actually act because we don't want to imagine some aspects of our future and we find it difficult to imagine the enormity of what's happening and our role within that enormity. But if you can activate your ventromedial
yeah.
prefrontal cortex, you're on the way.
Wonderful. Perfect. So we have to do that. And I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about, so we can finish, about you as let's say a geek, possibly a nerd. What inspires you? What kind of books, novels, series, movies you consume, Poe? Is it something that is quite present in your life, or do you prefer to stay out in nature, contemplating green pastures? What is it that moves you? Because now, I one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast is really because I really like science, but I also like science fiction, fantasy. I love I think dystopian novels are my favorite, So we're talking about the future of humanity, and I'm thinking about Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, and I'm thinking about George Orwell, 1984, and how those things are merging apparently. But is there anything that you like to consume usually, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've found that science fiction can be really helpful actually in terms of broadening your mind and broadening your imagination. So I am, gently, I'm feeding myself more on a diet of science fiction, I would say.
Yeah.
Because I just think, in terms of what we were discussing before, in terms of ventromedial prefrontal cortex, we need our imaginations.
Yeah.
It's so important. So it's not, I don't think it's a problem to be reading about fantasy and stuff because actually, it encourages you to think outside the box, and it helps you confront a reality which isn't real until we've actually started thinking about it. So I think
Yes.
it's helpful sort of emotionally in that sense as well. And I love playing, yeah, I play video games with my kids as well. I
Oh,
love a
really?
yeah,
Interesting.
I love a bit of
Which
Star
video
Wars.
games do you play
Well,
usually?
my favorite
Yeah.
one is Star Wars Battlefront, actually.
Oh, really? Wow, that's surprising. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so I've played it and it's brilliant. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And I think one of the things that really drew me to Star Wars was that the feeling that, there was a very important story to be told about how we're going to relate to one another in the distant future when we start traveling intergalactically and but still, it's pretty much the same world. People haven't changed that much,
Yeah,
Yes, we haven't evolved, you would
absolutely.
say. Yes.
No.
Now, well, yeah, that takes eons, right, to happen. Evolution is really about millions of years, not really. Yeah,
Yeah, well, in terms of cognition and mental
yeah,
faculties, yes, it takes many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years.
yeah.
Yeah, physical things can happen a bit quicker. It can be observed over decades. But
Yes, perfect. And Paul, just to wrap up this episode, I wanted to ask you, do you have any final words for teachers, researchers watching us? Anything you want to say to the listening, to the community listening to us right now?
I think it's so important to consider the underlying processes if you're a teacher or a learner and try
Yeah,
to reflect on what's actually going on in your mind and brain. I think that's really important. Um, and I guess the other thing is emotions. I think emotions are so often left out of
yeah,
learning. So that's a huge thing. I think neuroscience is helping to draw attention to that a bit. And of course, I would say, wouldn't I, that more and more, I think teachers need to be considering what they're saying to children about the planet, about
yes.
climate and sustainability. And, hopefully my website, but other websites will be able to support them in thinking about that because it's such a different area of the curriculum because it's not just about knowledge and understanding, it's actually about taking action.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Paul Howard Jones, everyone. Such a pleasure. As I said, you are an inspiration, one of the best teachers I had. I can tell you that. And I think that everybody listening to this episode will learn so much from you. And I'll link everything you mentioned, the resources, your website, your podcast, so people can listen to you as well. And keep up the amazing work. Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, and you also, Andre, you keep up this podcast. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me on.
Well, thank you.